I will move House File 558, and we will be laying this over for possible inclusion. So Representative Howe, to your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And basically what this bill does is it's a response to having cities and developers not put the sidewalks in that should be there in the first place. And so what happens is these political subdivisions come now to request a grant to put those sidewalks in. And I don't have a problem with that with older developments that never put the sidewalks in. But I believe that somewhere along the line, we need to draw a line and say, as an indication to cities and to, if you want to be considered for a Safe Routes to School grant, you need to put it in your subdivision that these developers need to put in the sidewalks in the first place. Otherwise, what we could have is a developer builds a development without sidewalks, and the very next year, they come in for a Safe Routes to School grant to come back and put the sidewalks in at state expense. I firmly believe that this would then require those developers then to put that. I think we need to require the cities to put those sidewalks in, and instead of the state coming in and put them in. So I don't mind fixing the ones that currently exist back there. I just don't want any new ones getting fixed by state dollars, if that makes sense. So it's a pretty simple bill.
All right. Members, Representative Uglum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Howe, good idea. We say require a developer. Oftentimes cities will be putting in the sidewalks too. I mean, when I was mayor, we would frequently do that. Sometimes we would stick a developer if we could to get trails or sidewalks, but oftentimes the city would provide sidewalks too. The net result would be the same. We'd have the Safe Routes to School and we'd have the sidewalks done when a development's going in. Would that be your intention?
Representative Howe.
Mr. Chair, my intention is when we have these new subdevelopments going in, these new developments going in, is that they have it in their ordinance, their zoning ordinance, that requires those developers to put it in. And if they have that in their subdivision ordinance, they are good to go as far as a grant goes, or an application to the Safe Routes to Schools grant. This is, to me, would just be a criteria on the Safe Routes to Schools grant that says, do you have this, do you require that in your subdivision ordinance? And if it is, they can apply for this Safe Routes to School grant.
Mr. Chair, follow up.
All right, Representative Uglum.
And that could be possible, but again, driving up the cost of housing and everything else, because of course the developer is going to add on that for the housing and everything else. And there are certain areas, of course, where you have to make connections, or in a plat where it's more appropriate for the city to provide the sidewalks. I mean, one way or another, we have to get the sidewalks in there, but I don't think we should specifically exclude cities or other local units of government to provide that either.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Howe.
this wouldn't preclude that from happening. This just says you have to have it in your subdivision ordinance, that when you do a subdivision, it requires the developer to put them in. It wouldn't require it. I don't really. This would not preclude the city from putting them in. This just says that if a developer comes in with a plat, they need to figure out. That requirement needs to be in the subdivision ordinance, that the developer needs to put them in. Otherwise, I don't believe that a developer doesn't have to put it in, and then the city decides that they want to put a sidewalk in and comes from the entire state to put the sidewalk in. I disagree with that concept.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate what you're trying to do, because I agree. I don't want folks getting around this by not putting in sidewalks and then coming to the state and say, we're going to get the state to pay for our sidewalk. However, I would say there might be another way to do it, and that other way might be that if a subdivision is developed after a date certain, that they would not be, if they do not have it at the time they're put in, that they would not be eligible for any safe routes to school, which would then allow, because I know there are some subdivisions in my area, particularly in the townships, that are, and out in those areas that are, the homes are quite far apart, and I don't think they would want, or it would even maybe even be appropriate for sidewalks in those areas. However, the rest of, then the whole city or area would be punished in a township, I don't see township in here, but in a town that would have those types of subdivisions. You don't want the whole city punished and other streets in that city who might be older, have older city, housing stock. My street, for instance, doesn't have curbing even. You wouldn't want to hurt them. So I'm just saying, I agree with your concept. I think it's right on and we should do something, but there might be a different way that would protect those older cities who may want the Safe Routes to School grants for something that's already there in their community in a different part of town. If that makes sense. I hope I'm making sense.
Mr. Chair, I agree with that. If we need to put an amendment to this that says after this enactment in 2015, I'm good with that. But I do agree that that's what we're trying to do, is not punish anything from yesterday, but to go forward from here on out, that you need to have that in your subdivision ordinance, otherwise we got issues.
Well, Mr. Chair, and I thank you for that, because I do think there might be a better way to work it that will address some of the concerns you're hearing here. And so if you want help moving ahead, if I'm not making myself clear, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Representative Howe, I struggle with providing more mandates for local units of government, and wouldn't it just be easier to end the program? We could use the money for roads and bridges.
No.
Well, and my comment to that, Representative Drazkowski, is that's probably a technique. It's probably not the preferred method. So I believe that I'm frustrated because I lived on a street. My first house I built was on a street that didn't have sidewalks, and the kids played in the street. Bad scenario. I don't care which side of the road, the street you put the sidewalk on, but I'm a big believer. I don't know how this complete streets process works, but I do believe providing some sidewalks or trails to get to and from without having to walk in the middle of the street or on the side of the street without walking on the street, I think is appropriate.
Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Howe. First of all, I like the idea that you're trying to, what the concept is, and I definitely approve of that. And having been on a city council, I can tell you, having to put in sidewalks after the fact is not something that you want to go through more than once.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, Representative Powell, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My city is one of those that's pretty well fully developed, but not having sidewalks in a lot of the areas. Isn't some of this money come from Fed grants as well, federal grants? And how are you going to shut that money off if you can't tell the federals not to allow grants and so forth from the money that they're supplying? I don't think. How do we do that?
Somehow.
Well, Mr. Chair and Representative Earhart, I'm not a safe routes to schools expert by any stretch of the imagination, nor do I care to want to be, but I do believe that those grants are appropriated and managed by the Department of Transportation. And they are the folks that take that money and distribute it out. And if we have a process that we decide who gets grants and who gets that money and who doesn't, I think this should be part of the criteria in determining who gets that money and who doesn't.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that if the federal money is here and you shut it off and say you can't use it, my city can't use it because the state's passed a law saying that even though every one of our cities should be equal, and you have to, I think we'd be in court. But that's all, just a thought.
Mr. Chair and Representative Earhart, I believe that you said that your city is all pretty much built out.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't apply to you, because this applies to new subdivisions.
Well, my point, Mr. Chairman, is we have a lot of areas that don't have sidewalks.
And,
Representative Howe.
Mr. Chair, so this wouldn't apply to you because you're redeveloping, you're not, you'd be putting in sidewalks after the fact. This would apply to those new subdivisions. If you're gonna come in and redevelop something, you've got a new plat, that's where this would apply.
Well, thank you, members. I think at this point in time, Representative Howe, we will lay over or House File 558, and I think if members have had some good points and suggestions, and I would suggest working with Representative Howe and we'll either bring that back or work with it once it's in the bill. Thank you, Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.